On a cold night, a light drizzle fell on the streets of Los Angeles. The gas station lights glowed brightly, reflecting off the wet asphalt. It was one of those ordinary places most people didn't pay much attention to, but for Maria, this gas station was more than just a stop to fill up. It was where she worked hard, moving quickly between the pumps, wiping windshields and helping drivers with gas. Her worn jacket didn't keep her warm and the rain soaked her hair, but she kept going. She couldn't stop. She needed this job to pay rent, to put food on the table, and to make sure her 8-year-old daughter Clara was safe. Maria was 7 months pregnant, and every step she took made her back ache more. She forced herself to keep moving, her tired face showing how exhausted she was, but she had to keep going. This night, like every other, was about earning enough to make it through another month. Clara sat quietly under the station's awning, her small fingers clutching a red pencil as she carefully drew in an old book. She didn't have many pencils, just 3, one red, one blue and one yellow, but that didn't matter. She focused on her drawings, filling the pages with tiny detailed pictures that meant a lot to her. Her tiny hand was carefully colored in the lines, creating scenes she dreamed about. Suddenly, the low hum of a motorcycle broke through the night's quiet. A black motorcycle rolled smoothly into the gas station, the engine purring like a beast. The rider, dressed in a black leather jacket and helmet, dismounted with ease, removing the helmet and shaking his damp hair out. The man's face was familiar. Everyone recognized him, even if it wasn't just his looks that gave him away. It was his presence. Keanu Reeves. The actor people knew from movies, the one who was always kind and humble. Keanu stood there for a moment, taking in his surroundings. He glanced around the station, noticing Maria moving between the pumps, helping customers, and trying to keep her smile polite despite her obvious fatigue. His eyes then drifted to Clara, who was sitting quietly, completely absorbed in her drawing. She didn't notice Keanu at first. He approached her slowly, carefully, keeping his movements gentle. Curious, Keanu leaned over Clara's shoulder and glanced at her drawing. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple scene of a kitchen with steaming pots on the stove, a table in the middle, and a blank space near the counter. "Do you like to draw?" Keanu asked softly. Clara looked up, surprised by his presence. Her big eyes widened and she nodded shyly. "I draw places I want to go." "What's this place?" Keanu asked gently, pointing to the blank space in her drawing. Clara hesitated, squeezing her red pencil in her small hand as she tried to think. Before she could answer, Maria walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Clara, don't bother the gentleman," Maria said, smiling politely. Keanu smiled, his voice calm. "She's not bothering me. I was just learning about her drawings." Maria gave him a cautious look but didn't say anything. A car honked at the next pump and she turned back to work. Keanu stood quietly, watching as Maria returned to her duties. His eyes returned to Clara's drawing, something about it holding his attention. It wasn't just a picture. It felt like it carried a dream of something more. There was something in that blank space that tugged at him. The night was quiet, but it carried a heavy sadness beneath its surface. Maria wiped the last windshield of the night, her movements slow and deliberate. The weight of her pregnancy pressed heavily against her lower back, sending sharp waves of pain through her. She tried to hide it, tried to force a smile as she worked, but her face betrayed her. The tired lines on her forehead spoke louder than words. From a distance, Keanu noticed her struggle. His eyes softened. He took a step closer, his voice quiet but concerned. "Do you need help with something? You seem tired." Maria looked up, surprised but polite. "Thank you, but I'm fine. Just a little back pain." "It's normal for pregnancy." "Normal shouldn't mean this much," Keanu said softly, his tone carrying genuine care. Maria sighed and looked down at the ground. "There's not much I can do. It's just part of life." "But it shouldn't be," Keanu said again, his voice gentle but firm. Maria's gaze flickered with exhaustion, but she didn't look up. "This is my life now. I made choices that led me here. I don't have anything to complain about." Keanu's heart ached at her words and he spoke more softly. "But you should rest sometimes. You don't have to carry everything alone." Maria laughed lightly. There was no humor in it, just a bitter edge. "Rest? I don't really have time for that. Bills don't wait, and with the baby coming, I need to work even harder. I don't have a choice." Keanu's brows furrowed slightly, and his voice softened further. "Even though it feels like you have no choice, it shouldn't be this way." Maria looked at him directly, her eyes tired but filled with something else, resignation. "I wonder sometimes if I'm doing enough," she admitted quietly. If one day Clara will look back and think I just fought but never really lived, that I never gave her something good. Clara, who had been listening quietly, softly reached out and placed her small hand over her mother's. You give me everything, Mama. Maria's face softened and she smiled, though her eyes still held a sadness. You're all that matters, sophomore. You're the reason I keep going. Keanu observed the exchange between mother and daughter, feeling a deep empathy for Maria. He could see she wasn't just carrying the weight of pregnancy and long shifts, but also the emotional burden of trying to make sure Clara had a good life, even when it seemed impossible. I worry sometimes, Maria said quietly. I wonder if I'm doing enough for her. If one day she'll look back and think I just fought but never really lived, that I never gave her something beautiful. Clara squeezed her mother's hand. You give me everything, Mama. Maria smiled, but her eyes were sad. You're all that matters, sophomore. You're the reason I keep going. Keanu watched the exchange between mother and daughter, feeling a deep empathy for Maria. He realized that she wasn't just carrying the weight of her pregnancy and grueling shifts but also the emotional burden of making sure Clara had a good life, even when it seemed impossible sometimes. Maria's voice broke slightly as she continued. Sometimes I wonder if I'm enough for her. If I'm giving her a good life. What about her father? Keanu asked gently. Maria's expression froze and for a moment she didn't answer. Then she spoke quietly, her voice trembling. He left when he found out I was pregnant again. He didn't want more responsibility. He said it was already hard enough with one child. Keanu felt a knot tighten in his chest. So he packed his things and left? Yes, Maria said quietly. Her voice faltered. Clara looked at her mother with sad eyes, but she said nothing. Maria squeezed her daughter's hand tightly, trying to offer comfort. And you? Keanu asked softly. What did you do after that? Maria took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders with a strength that seemed rehearsed. I kept going. I didn't have a choice. Suddenly, a car honked at pump 2, interrupting their conversation. Maria turned to work, straightening her posture and forcing herself to move. Keanu watched as she walked away, noticing a slight limp in her right foot. Her pregnancy made everything harder, and it was clear she was exhausted. His gaze shifted to Clara, who had returned to her chair. She still held the red pencil, but her eyes followed her mother with a worry that seemed far too heavy for someone her age. Keanu couldn't stop thinking about what he had just witnessed, the weight Maria carried, the love she showed her daughter, and the quiet strength in both of them. He felt moved by their story, something deep inside him stirred. He couldn't shake the thought of how this woman's life was so full of struggle, yet she kept going day after day for her daughter. And he knew without a doubt that he wanted to do something to help. Not just for a moment, but in a way that could truly make a difference in their lives. Keanu's mom works a lot, Clara said softly, crouching down so she could talk to Clara at her level. Clara nodded, holding her red pencil tightly in her small hand. Sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm asleep, she whispers. What? Keanu asked gently, feeling a little sad. Because she's tired, Clara said, her voice quiet. And, like Mama always says, Papa left when he found out about me. He said he didn't want another mouth to feed, Clara added, pressing harder as she colored. Keanu felt a sharp ache in his chest. Why would anyone leave because of that? Because he didn't want to take care of us, Clara explained, coloring with more force. Keanu stayed quiet, the words echoing in his mind. He looked back at Maria, and at that moment he knew he had to do something. The struggles this woman faced, and the hopeful light still shining in Clara's eyes, couldn't be ignored. Keanu stood by Clara, his mind racing. He didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. What he was about to do would change everything for them. The light drizzle made the air feel colder and heavier. Maria adjusted her jacket over her shoulders, a shiver running through her tired body. Clara sat next to her, scribbling in her notebook, but she often glanced up at her mom, as if sensing the burden she carried. Keanu stood nearby, watching the quiet moment between mother and daughter. He couldn't look away from the stark contrast, Clara's bright innocence and Maria's visible exhaustion, even though she tried to hide it. Can I ask you something? Keanu asked quietly, breaking the silence. Maria looked at him, surprised but nodded. If you could change one thing, just one thing, what would it be? Keanu asked. Maria hesitated. The question seemed simple, but the answer felt heavy. She looked down at the wet ground, thinking for a moment. I don't know. I don't think I can think like that anymore. There's no space for what-ifs when you have bills to pay and kids to take care of, she replied softly. Keanu nodded, understanding her words. I imagine you've had to give up a lot for that, haven't you? Keanu asked gently. Giving up? That's not the right word, Maria said, searching for the right way to explain. Life just doesn't let you have certain things. You can't dream when you're barely making rent. Clara looked up from her drawing. But you still cook, Mama. And you make the best lasagna in the world. Maria smiled softly, but it wasn't the happy kind. Making lasagna at home and running a restaurant are two different things, sweetheart. But you've wanted a restaurant, haven't you? Keanu asked, turning his attention back to Maria. She stayed silent for a moment, then whispered, yes, when I was younger, before all of this. Before Sergio. Keanu could hear the sadness in her voice when she said the name. Your husband? Keanu asked gently. Maria nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When we got married, we dreamed of opening a restaurant together. He used to say I had a gift, that my love for food was special. But after Clara was born, things changed. It got harder. When I found out I was pregnant again, he left. Clara grabbed her mom's hand tightly, offering silent comfort. Maria swallowed hard before continuing. He said he couldn't handle another burden. That he didn't want another responsibility. Then he just walked away. Keanu felt his chest tighten. He looked at Clara, who was now drawing quietly, and then at Maria, who tried to keep herself together. Maybe you feel like you don't have any choices right now, but what if you had help? What if there was a way to change that? Keanu asked, looking at Maria seriously. Maria frowned, clearly skeptical. I appreciate it, but I don't need charity. I'm not talking about charity, Keanu said firmly but gently. I'm talking about an opportunity, something that could help you breathe a little easier. Maria shook her head, still unsure. Why do you care? I'm nobody important. Because everyone deserves the chance to dream, Keanu replied calmly. And because you deserve more than just surviving. Keanu's tone grew stronger. I'll be back tomorrow. Maria stood still, speechless. She didn't know what to make of his promise to return, but what he would bring the next day was something she could never have imagined. The next morning, Maria finished her shift at the gas station and was organizing things behind the counter when she heard the familiar sound of a motorcycle engine. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. Clara, sitting beside her, looked up with curiosity. Keanu parked his motorcycle at the same pump as before. He stepped off, his face calm but determined. In his hands he carried 2 large paper bags. Good morning, he greeted, walking toward them. Maria looked at him, still a little wary. You actually came back? I said I would, Keanu replied simply. He placed the bags on the counter and turned to Clara. Good morning, Clara. Good morning, Clara replied excitedly, already drawn to the bags. Keanu looked at Maria, noticing her hesitation. Before you say anything, I want you to see what's in here. He opened the bags and revealed basic groceries, a few new clothes for Clara, and a fresh box of colored pencils on top. Pencils? Clara gasped in delight, clutching them to her chest. Thank you, mister. Maria watched her daughter's reaction, but her gaze also stayed on the items in the bags. She opened her mouth to speak, but Keanu stopped her. I know what you're thinking, he said gently. But this isn't charity. It's just a little push to help you breathe easier. Maria shook her head, trying to hold back emotion. I don't know if I can accept this. Keanu placed an envelope on the counter. This is for rent, just for this month. And there's one more thing. He handed her a slightly crumpled flyer. Maria took it and read the words carefully. Asterisk culinary course for single mothers. She blinked, confused. What is this? It's a free cooking course, Keanu explained. It teaches professional techniques and even helps with the business side of things, just in case you ever want to turn this into something bigger. Maria looked at the flyer, then back at Keanu, clearly struggling to understand what was happening. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us. Keanu offered a small smile, serious yet kind. Because you deserve it. And because sometimes, one act of kindness can change everything. Maria took a deep breath, trying to keep back her tears. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, Keanu replied. Just think about it and know that someone believes in you. Clara, still clutching the pencils, looked at the flyer in her mother's hand. Mama, will you learn new recipes? Like the ones Grandma used to make? Maria looked at her daughter, then at the flyer she was holding. For a moment, something inside her seemed to change. Just a small space for hope, though faint. She held the flyer tightly, glanced at Clara and then back at Keanu. She was still unsure, but something new sparkled in her eyes. She whispered, maybe it's time to try. Little did she know what Keanu had planned next would be even more life-changing. Months passed and the cooking course Maria joined didn't just make her a better cook. It opened doors she never imagined. With each class, she rediscovered her love for food and, more importantly, how food could bring people together. Keanu kept his promise. While Maria was learning, he quietly gathered contacts, found support, and discovered the perfect little space in their neighborhood. Simple but inviting, the perfect spot for what was to come. One special morning, Maria and Clara arrived at the location, unsure of what they would find. Keanu stood there, calm and smiling, waiting by the entrance of the building. "What is this?" Maria asked, looking at the storefront. Keanu stepped aside and pointed to a sign above the door. The letters were elegant: Lock Diana. Maria froze, shock spreading across her face. She brought a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back tears as they silently rolled down her cheeks. Clara clung to her mother's arm, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's your restaurant, Mama?" Clara exclaimed, pulling her toward the door. Maria turned to Keanu, disbelief written all over her face. You did this?" "Why?" Keanu smiled, though his voice was serious. "Because you deserve it. Because your story and your talent are special, and the world needs to see them. Because no one should have to give up on their dreams." Together they entered the space. The inside of the restaurant was simple, but it had everything Maria needed. A functional kitchen, neatly arranged tables, and thoughtful details that reminded her of her grandmother's restaurant in Italy. Clara ran to a corner where a small table with crayons and paper had been set up, a gift from Keanu months ago. Maria ran her fingers across the surfaces, still trying to believe it was real. She turned to Keanu, searching for the right words. I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "Just do what you do best. Cook, bring people together, and pass this kindness forward." The grand opening happened a few days later, and the restaurant quickly became a beloved gathering spot in the community. Maria cooked dishes that told stories, each one inspired by her grandmother's recipes but with her own creative twist. The food was amazing, but what really made the place special was the heart she poured into every detail. That night, Clara sat at a table, proudly handing out menus she had designed herself. In the kitchen, Maria prepared a lasagna as the restaurant buzzed with laughter and conversation. Keanu sat at a quiet table in the corner, quietly watching it all. When Maria brought a plate of lasagna to his table, she sat down for a moment, smiling. "I never imagined I'd be here," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Keanu glanced around. "But you deserve to be. What you've created here, it's something everyone needs to experience." As Maria looked around the bustling restaurant, she realized her dream had come back to life. But the real transformation wasn't just in her life. Her community was changing too. The aroma of freshly cooked meals filled the air, wrapping the restaurant in warmth. People sat together at the tables, sharing laughter and stories. Clara, with her ever-present crayons in hand, moved between the tables, handing out menus she had drawn herself. She loved talking about the restaurant, excitedly sharing that it was inspired by her grandmother's cherished recipes. Keanu sat at his usual table, quietly watching everything with a satisfied smile. He knew the change he was witnessing ran deeper than just the busy room around him. Maria approached him with a cup of coffee. "You always sit at the same table," she remarked playfully. Keanu smiled. "It's the best spot in the house, I can see everything." Maria took a seat across from him, sweeping her gaze around the restaurant. "I never could have imagined this." Not a day went by that she didn't thank him for what he had done, for her and Clara. Keanu shook his head gently. "You changed everything. I just gave you a little push." Maria smiled back, her expression growing serious. "I'll never forget what you've done for us. And I'll make sure to pay it forward." Keanu nodded. "That's all I could ever ask. Kindness is a cycle. Now you have the chance to be that change for someone else." At that moment, Clara appeared at the table, holding her sketchbook. "Mama, look what I drew." Maria took the sketchbook and chuckled softly. It was a drawing of the restaurant, now complete with customers, steaming plates of food, and a large sign outside that read in bold letters, "Lock Diana." "It's perfect," Maria said, pulling Clara into a hug. Keanu stood up, leaving a few bills on the table. "I think it's time for me to go." Maria looked at him, surprised. "What? You're part of this?" "I always will be," he replied, "but this place is yours now. It's time for you to keep writing this story." He gave Clara a warm smile before heading to the door, leaving Maria deeply moved. As Maria watched Keanu walk away, she realized her life had not just changed, it had transformed. And now, she was ready to be the catalyst for someone else's transformation. What she would do next would become the next chapter in her story, a story of courage, determination, and the profound power of kindness. The message she hoped to share was simple yet powerful: never stop dreaming. Dreams are the flame that keeps hope alive within us, even in the hardest moments. They give us purpose, direction, and something to fight for. And alongside dreams, kindness becomes the thread that connects us, a quiet force that transforms lives by reminding us that no one is ever truly alone. Dreams and kindness have the power to change the world, not in grand, immediate gestures, but one life at a time, one act at a time. So believe in them, nurture them, and pass them on, because that's how we build a more beautiful future for all of us. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.